The walking stick clattered against the pavement. Every head turned. 32 recruits, 1 drill sergeant, and an old man who'd just stepped onto the parade ground like he owned it. What happened next has been studied at 3 military academies, and it started with 5 words. Give me your formation, Sergeant. Type respect. If you believe true skill never fades, because what you're about to witness will change how you think about every veteran you've ever walked past. His name was Frank Delgado, 74 years old, silver hair cropped close to his skull, hands spotted with age but steady as granite. He'd driven 4 hours that Tuesday morning to Fort Mitchell, not for any ceremony or official business, but simply to see an old friend. Colonel James Patterson. They'd served together 40 years ago, back when the world was different and both men wore their youth like armour. Frank had arrived at the main gate just after 0800, visitor's pass clipped to his faded denim jacket. The jacket itself told a story if you knew how to read it. No medals, no patches, just worn cotton that had seen better decades. The security officer had barely glanced at him. Another old-timer visiting the base. Happened every week. But this old-timer was different, and the security officer would learn that before the day was done. Colonel Patterson had met Frank at the administrative building, and the reunion was everything you'd expect from men who'd shared foxholes and letters from home, and the kind of silence that only comes after combat. They embraced. They laughed about grey hair and bad knees. They promised each other that 60 was the new 40, even though neither believed it anymore. I want to show you something, the colonel said, gesturing toward the parade ground. New training cycle started 3 weeks ago. Fresh batch of recruits. You'll get a kick out of watching them. Frank nodded, leaning on his walking stick as they moved across the base. The stick was oak, hand-carved, a gift from his grandson. He hated needing it. Hated the way it announced his age with every step. But his left knee had made the decision for him 6 years ago, and pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. They reached the edge of the parade ground just as the morning drill session was beginning. 32 recruits stood in formation, or what was supposed to be formation. Even from 50 yards away, Frank could see the problems. Spacing was inconsistent. Some recruits stood too close, shoulders nearly touching. Others had drifted apart, creating gaps that would get soldiers killed in combat. Their alignment was worse. The rows wavered like heat mirages, each recruit seemingly convinced that their position was correct while remaining oblivious to the chaos around them. And then there was the drill sergeant. Staff Sergeant Kevin Morrison was 29 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he'd memorized the manual but never understood its soul. He stood before his formation with a clipboard in one hand and frustration carved into his face. This was his 3rd training cycle, and by all objective measures he was failing. Left face, the command echoed across the parade ground. What followed was not a crisp, unified turn, but rather a staggered disaster. Some recruits turned immediately, others hesitated, their brains processing the command a half-second too late. 2 recruits turned the wrong direction entirely, colliding with their neighbours in a tangle of elbows and muttered apologies. Frank's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Colonel Patterson noticed. Of course he noticed. After 4 decades, he could read Frank Delgado better than most men read newspapers. They're struggling, the colonel said quietly. They're not struggling, Frank replied. They're not being taught. The colonel raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They continued watching. Here's something most people don't understand about close-order drill. It's not marching. It's not ceremony. And it's definitely not outdated tradition that modern military strategists have somehow failed to eliminate from training programs. Close-order drill is the foundational language of military discipline. It teaches recruits to respond to commands instantly, without hesitation, without questioning, without the dangerous pause that gets people killed in combat. When a drill sergeant shouts "left face," the recruit's body should move before their brain finishes processing the words. That's the point. You're building reflexes. You're creating a nervous system that responds to authority with precision. You're teaching young men and women that in combat, the person giving orders has information you don't have, and the half-second you spend wondering why might be the half-second that determines whether your squad lives or dies. Every drill command has a history, every movement has a purpose, and the sergeant on that parade ground was butchering all of it. About face! Again the formation dissolved into chaos. The about face is one of the more complex basic movements, a 2-count pivot that requires the recruit to place the toe of their right foot behind and to the left of their left heel, then rotate 180 degrees on both heels. Done correctly, an entire formation appears to flip in perfect unison, like a playing card turning over. Done incorrectly, as it was being done now, it looks like a group of strangers trying to use a revolving door simultaneously. Staff Sergeant Morrison's face reddened. His voice rose. "What the hell was that? I said about face, not stumble around like you've never walked before in your lives. Reset. Right face. Forward. March." The formation lurched forward. Within 10 steps, they'd lost cadence. Within 20, the spacing had collapsed so badly that the rear squad was nearly walking on the heels of the squad in front. "Halt!" Half the formation stopped. The other half took 1 or 2 additional steps before processing the command. 2 recruits in the back collided and one dropped his cover. Frank closed his eyes, took a breath. When he opened them again, something had changed in his posture. The colonel saw it immediately. The shoulders were squarer, the spine straightened almost imperceptibly, and there was something in Frank's eyes that the colonel hadn't seen in decades. Something cold, something precise. "Permission to speak freely, James," the colonel nodded. "Your sergeant is teaching them to fail." It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. Frank's voice carried the clinical certainty of a surgeon identifying exactly where a procedure had gone wrong. He's calling commands too quickly, not giving their nervous systems time to encode the response before throwing the next one at them. He's correcting errors after the fact instead of preventing them through proper instruction, and he's never once demonstrated the movement himself. The colonel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. His training scores are adequate. Training scores measure whether someone has memorized procedures. They don't measure whether someone can teach. Those are different skills, James. You know that. Out on the parade ground, Staff Sergeant Morrison had assembled his recruits again. His voice was hoarse from shouting. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Parade rest!" The movement was sloppy, feet snapping apart at inconsistent intervals. Hands clasped behind backs at different heights. One recruit forgot entirely and remained at attention, then scrambled to correct when he noticed the others had moved. Morrison's patience was visibly cracking. He strode toward the offending recruit, voice rising to a bark that carried across the entire parade ground. "I swear to God, Carter, if you can't perform a simple parade rest, I will have you scrubbing latrines until you dream about drill commands. What is so difficult about this? What is so difficult?" The recruit, Carter, apparently stared straight ahead, jaw trembling. He was maybe 19, 20 at most, and he was terrified. Frank's walking stick struck the pavement. Hard. The sound cracked across the parade ground like a rifle shot. Every head turned. Morrison spun around, eyes searching for the source of the interruption. When his gaze found Frank and the colonel, confusion replaced his anger. Colonel Patterson cleared his throat. "Staff Sergeant Morrison. A word." Morrison jogged over, confusion still evident on his face. His eyes flicked briefly to Frank, an old man in civilian clothes, leaning on a walking stick clearly of no importance, before focusing entirely on the colonel. "Sir, Staff Sergeant, this is Frank Delgado, an old friend of mine. He served." Morrison nodded politely but dismissively. "Sir, thank you for your service." The words were automatic, hollow, the same phrase he'd said to every veteran who visited the base for tours or events. It meant nothing to him. "Master Sergeant Delgado," the colonel continued, emphasizing the rank, "was the senior drill instructor at Parris Island from 1975 to 1991. He trained over 3,000 Marines." Morrison's expression flickered. Parris Island was the legendary Marine Corps recruit depot, the crucible where civilians were transformed into Marines. Its drill instructors were considered the best in any branch of the United States military. To hold that position for 16 years was almost unheard of. But Morrison's skepticism returned quickly. 16 years. This old man had been retired longer than Morrison had been alive. "Sir," Morrison said carefully, "I appreciate the history, but we're in the middle of a training session. If the colonel would like me to resume—" "Your recruits are failing basic drill," Frank interrupted. His voice was calm, conversational even, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. 3 weeks into training, and they can't execute a left face without tripping over each other. You're calling commands at irregular intervals, training them to listen for your rhythm instead of responding to the command itself. You're correcting errors through volume when you should be preventing them through demonstration, And you're creating fear when you should be creating confidence. Morrison's jaw tightened. His eyes hardened. Who the hell was this old man to critique his methods? Guest of the colonel or not, former drill instructor or not, this civilian had no authority here. Master Sergeant, Morrison said, the title carrying a thin edge of condescension. With respect, training methodologies have evolved significantly since the 70s. We use evidence-based techniques now, graduated response protocols. The recruits need time to... Then why can't they march? The question hung in the air, simple, devastating. If your evidence-based techniques are superior, Frank continued, then demonstrate the evidence. Show me one unit movement executed with precision. Just one. Morrison's face reddened. He glanced at the colonel looking for support, but Patterson's expression was unreadable. I don't have to prove anything to a... You have 32 recruits who will eventually serve in combat, Frank said, and his voice had changed now. The conversational tone was gone. In its place was something harder. Something that belonged to parade grounds and rifle ranges and the kind of moments where lives hang in the balance. They will depend on each other. They will depend on the reflexes you're supposed to be building in them. When a sergeant shouts, "Get down" in a firefight, will your recruits drop instantly, or will they hesitate the way they're hesitating now? Morrison said nothing. Every drill command is a combat command in disguise, Frank continued. When they learn to respond to left face without thinking, they're building the neural pathways that will respond to take cover without thinking. When they learn to move in unison on a parade ground, they're building the unit cohesion that will keep them moving together under fire. You're not teaching them to march, Sergeant. You're teaching them to survive, and right now, you're failing them. The silence stretched. Colonel Patterson watched the two men with an expression that might have been satisfaction. Finally, the colonel spoke. Master Sergeant Delgado, would you be willing to offer a brief demonstration? Morrison's eyes widened. Sir, that's not... I mean, the liability alone... The Master Sergeant isn't going to sue us, Staff Sergeant. The colonel's voice was dry. I've seen him survive things that would put you in therapy. A little drill work won't hurt him. Frank looked at his walking stick, looked at the parade ground, looked at the 32 recruits still standing in their ragged formation, watching the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I'm 74 years old, Frank said quietly. Bad knee, arthritis in both hands. I haven't led a drill formation in over 30 years. I understand if you'd rather... Morrison started. Frank handed his walking stick to the colonel. Hold this. And he walked onto the parade ground. There's a moment that soldiers talk about in hushed tones, a moment when someone who has truly mastered their craft steps into their element. Photographers call it the zone, musicians call it the pocket, soldiers call it bearing. Frank Delgado's bearing transformed with every step. His limp didn't disappear, the knee was too far gone for miracles, but it ceased to matter. His stride lengthened, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and by the time he reached the front of the formation, every recruit was staring at him with the same unconscious recognition. This man was different. This man was dangerous. My name is Master Sergeant Frank Delgado, United States Marine Corps, retired. His voice filled the parade ground without shouting. A command voice, drill instructors call it. Something you develop over years of training, or you never develop at all. For the next 15 minutes, you belong to me. No one moved. No one breathed. Staff Sergeant Morrison has been teaching you the manual. Now I'm going to teach you why the manual matters. He began walking along the front of the formation, his eyes examining each recruit in turn, evaluating, cataloguing. Some met his gaze, others looked away. One, the recruit called Carter, who'd been singled out earlier, stood rigid with fear, certain that more humiliation was coming. Frank stopped in front of him. What's your name, son? C. Carter, Master Sergeant. Private First Class Jacob Carter. You're scared. It wasn't a question. Yes, Master Sergeant. Frank nodded slowly. Good. Fear means you understand that this matters. Fear means you're paying attention. But fear isn't the same as panic. Panic gets people killed. Fear, when properly directed, keeps people alive. He turned to address the entire formation. You've been taught that drill commands are about obedience. That's partially true, but that's not the whole truth. Drill commands are about creating a unit consciousness. Right now, you're 32 individuals standing in proximity to each other. By the time we're done, you'll be one organism with 32 bodies, and that organism will move like nothing you've ever seen. He stepped back, positioning himself at the front corner of the formation, where he could see every recruit and they could see him. I'm going to teach you something they don't put in the manual. Every drill command has a rhythm, a music. Left is the preparatory command. It tells your brain what's about to happen. Face is the command of execution. It tells your body to move. The pause between them is where discipline lives. Too long and attention wanders. Too short and the brain doesn't have time to prepare. He demonstrated, his hands moving to illustrate. Watch my breathing. I inhale before the preparatory command. I hold during the pause. I exhale on the command of execution. The exhale gives the word power. The breath gives it rhythm. Now you try. Inhale. 32 chests expanded. Left. The pause lasted exactly 1 second. Not 3/4, not 1 1/4, exactly 1. Face. And something miraculous happened. Not perfection. Several recruits still turned slowly. 2 still hesitated. But the overall movement was cleaner, sharper. For the first time, the formation had shown a glimpse of what it could become. Frank's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Approval, carefully rationed. Better. Again. Reset. Right. Face. The recruits turned. This time only one hesitated. Better still. Now watch me. Frank stepped forward, positioning himself where every recruit could observe. Despite his bad knee, despite his 74 years, he executed a left face with such crisp precision that several recruits gasped audibly. His feet moved in perfect concert. The snap of the turn, the alignment of heels, the absolute stillness that followed. It was like watching a machine. But not a cold machine, a living one. The feet matter, Frank said, returning to face them. But the feet are only the visible part. The turn begins in your core, transfers through your hips, drives through your planted foot, and completes with the moving foot snapping into position. Your arms don't swing. They remain locked at your sides. Your head doesn't bob. It stays level throughout the rotation. And your eyes don't drop. They maintain their forward focus until the turn is complete, then snap to the new direction. He moved through the formation now, gently correcting stances with touches so brief and precise that recruits barely registered them before finding themselves in proper position. Private Carter, your weight is on your heels. That makes you slow to respond. Shift forward. Feel the balls of your feet. You should be able to lift your heels a 1/4 inch without losing balance. Carter adjusted. His posture changed immediately, more alert, more ready. Private. Frank paused before a tall recruit near the back. Williams, Master Sergeant. Williams, your spacing is off. See your peripheral vision? You should be able to see the shoulder of the recruit to your left without turning your head. If you can't, you're too far away. If you can see their face, you're too close. Peripheral vision is your friend. Use it. He continued down the line, making dozens of micro-corrections. No shouting, no humiliation, just precise instruction, delivered with the confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. Off to the side, Staff Sergeant Morrison watched with an expression that had evolved from skepticism to confusion to something approaching humiliation. His methods were evidence-based. His training scores were adequate. But this old man was doing in 10 minutes what Morrison hadn't accomplished in 3 weeks. Forward! Frank had returned to the front of the formation. His voice rose now, not to a shout, but to a command presence that seemed to fill the entire parade ground. March! The formation stepped off, and for the first time they stepped off together. It wasn't perfect. The cadence wavered slightly around step 15. One recruit in the 3rd rank fell a half step behind, but they were moving as a unit. Their feet struck the pavement in unison, creating a rhythm that built with each step. Left, right, left, right, left, right. Your footsteps tell a story, Frank called out, his voice carrying easily over the sound of marching. Right now, I can hear 32 different stories, 32 different rhythms, but you're training to fight as one. You need to tell one story. Listen to each other. Match your pace to the formation, not to yourself. He walked alongside them, limping but never slowing. Column left. March. The formation executed a 90-degree turn, a difficult maneuver that required the inside file to mark time while the outside file swung around like a door on a hinge. 3 weeks ago, this would have been impossible. 3 weeks of Morrison's training hadn't even attempted it. Now the formation executed it with only minor hesitations. Halt! 32 feet struck the ground as one. The silence that followed was absolute. Frank surveyed the formation. Something had changed in the recruits' faces. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else. Focus, determination, pride. You felt it, Frank said. That moment when you stopped being individuals and started being a unit. That's what we're building here. Not obedience, unity. When you march in step, when you turn as one, when you halt together, you're not just following commands, you're becoming something greater than yourselves. He turned to face them fully. In combat, that unity will save your lives. The recruit to your left will know exactly where you are without looking. The recruit to your right will trust that you'll be there when they need you. Drill isn't ceremony, it's survival training disguised as marching. Colonel Patterson had moved closer, still holding Frank's walking stick. His expression was complex. Pride, nostalgia, perhaps a hint of sadness for the years that had passed. Staff Sergeant Morrison had also approached, his earlier defensiveness replaced by something else. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. Master Sergeant Delgado, how did you do that? Frank looked at the younger man, saw not a failed drill sergeant, but a young soldier who had been given a job without being given the tools to do it properly. His expression softened. You learned procedure, Staff Sergeant. Procedures are written by people who understand the what. I learned from people who understood the why. When you know why a drill movement matters, you can teach it to anyone. When you only know how it's supposed to look, you can only criticize when it doesn't. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I've been trying to correct their mistakes, he said finally. You prevented the mistakes from happening, Frank nodded. Correction builds fear of failure. Prevention builds confidence in success. Your recruits were afraid to move because they'd been punished for moving wrong. I gave them a framework for moving right, and suddenly movement became possible. Would you... Morrison hesitated. Would you be willing to show me more? Not for the recruits, for me. It was perhaps the most difficult question Morrison had ever asked, admitting in front of his commanding officer and his recruits that he had been the one who needed training all along. Frank's expression didn't change, but something warmed in his eyes. What's your first name, Sergeant? Kevin, Master Sergeant. Kevin. I spent 16 years at Paris Island. You know how many drill instructors I trained in that time? Morrison shook his head. 418. Some were natural talents, most weren't. But every single one of them improved because they were willing to learn. The fact that you're asking means you're already ahead of most of them. He glanced at Colonel Patterson. James, you still have my email? The Colonel nodded. The Colonel, Kevin. I can't stay for an extended training period. Arthritis. Bad knee. My wife will kill me if I try. But I can give you something better. Documentation. Training materials. The actual lesson plans we used at Paris Island. Adapted for today's recruits. And if you're willing to put in the work, I'll review video recordings and provide feedback. Morrison blinked. You'd do that? You asked me how I did what I did. The answer is that someone taught me, 48 years ago, when I was standing right where you're standing now. Frustrated, failing, certain that my recruits were the problem. A master sergeant named William Chen, we called him the Ghost because you never heard him coming, pulled me aside and said words I've never forgotten. Frank paused, his eyes distant with memory. He said, Morrison, if your recruits aren't learning, you aren't teaching. The failure is never in the student. The failure is in the instruction. A thin smile crossed Frank's weathered face. I've spent 50 years trying to live up to those words. Most days I fail, but I keep trying. That's all any of us can do. The recruits remained in formation, watching the exchange. Private Carter, whose fear had been transformed into focus, spoke without thinking. Master Sergeant Delgado, sir, what you did just now, that thing where we all moved together, I've never felt anything like that. Is that what combat feels like? Frank turned to look at the young recruit. The question was earnest, innocent, and it deserved an honest answer. No, Private. Combat feels like terror and chaos and praying that your training kicks in when your brain shuts down. But that feeling you just experienced, that unity, that's what gets you through the terror, because you're not alone. You're never alone. Every soldier in your unit went through the same training you did. They know the same commands, they have the same reflexes, and when everything goes to hell, and it will go to hell, That shared foundation is the thread that holds the unit together. He looked across the formation, meeting as many eyes as he could. Some of you won't see combat. Some of you will see more than you ever wanted. But all of you will carry this training with you for the rest of your lives. Every time you respond instantly to a command. Every time you trust someone to cover your position. Every time you move in sync with a team, in the military, in a job, in a family. The discipline you're building here isn't just military discipline. It's the discipline of being part of something larger than yourself. The parade ground was silent. Even the wind seemed to have stilled. Frank turned to Colonel Patterson. "I believe you still have my walking stick, James." The colonel smiled. A rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually stoic face. He handed the oak cane back to his old friend. "You know," Patterson said quietly, "I brought you out here hoping you'd tell Morrison he was doing a good job. That modern training methods were fine, that the recruits just needed time." Frank took the cane, leaning on it with a slight grunt as his knee protested the preceding activity. "Sorry to disappoint." "Don't be. I needed to see that. We all did." Patterson raised his voice, addressing the formation. "Recruits, what you witnessed today was a masterclass in drill instruction from one of the finest drill instructors the Marine Corps has ever produced. Master Sergeant Delgado's methods trained 3,000 Marines. His trainees went on to serve in every conflict from Vietnam to the Gulf War to Afghanistan. Many are still serving today." The colonel paused. "Staff Sergeant Morrison will be incorporating Master Sergeant Delgado's methodologies into your training going forward. I expect to see significant improvement in the coming weeks. Is that understood?" "Sir, yes, sir." 32 voices in unison. It wasn't perfect unison. Some voices were louder than others. Some carried more conviction, but it was miles ahead of where they'd been an hour ago. Frank nodded once with satisfaction. "One more thing," he said, his voice carrying across the parade ground. "Every one of you is going to fail at something in the coming weeks. You'll drop your cover. You'll turn the wrong direction. You'll lose cadence during a march. When that happens, I want you to remember something." He lifted his cane slightly. "I walked onto this parade ground with a bad knee and 74 years of wear on my body. I couldn't run if my life depended on it, but I can still demonstrate a left face that would pass inspection at the Commandant's review. You know why? Silence. Because I failed 1,000 times before I got it right. Every failure taught me something. Every mistake refined my technique. Don't fear failure. Fear not learning from it." He turned to leave, then paused. "Private Carter." The young recruit stiffened. "Master Sergeant, you asked what combat feels like. The truth is, combat feels different for everyone, but I'll tell you what it should feel like." Frank's voice dropped, taking on a weight that had nothing to do with volume. "It should feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you trained to do, with exactly the people you trust most in the world. If you do the work, if you really do the work, that's what it'll feel like. And that feeling starts here, on this parade ground, with these drills, with these people standing next to you." He raised his cane in a gesture that was almost a salute. "Carry on, Marines." It was technically incorrect. They were Army recruits, not Marines. But somehow, coming from Master Sergeant Frank Delgado, it sounded less like a mistake and more like a blessing. As Frank and the colonel walked away, the parade ground slowly came back to life behind them. Staff Sergeant Morrison's voice carried across the morning air, but it sounded different now. Less desperate, more confident. More like he understood what he was building instead of just going through the motions. "All right, recruits, we're going to start from the beginning, and this time we're going to do it right. Everyone take a breath. Feel the balls of your feet." Frank smiled slightly. His knee was screaming. His arthritis was already stiffening his hands. He would pay for this afternoon's demonstration with days of pain. It was worth it. "Thank you," Colonel Patterson said as they walked. "I mean it, Frank, thank you." Frank shrugged, the gesture modest despite everything that had just transpired. 3,000 Marines, he said, 418 drill instructors, one lesson I've never stopped teaching. And what's that? Frank looked back at the parade ground where 32 recruits were learning for the first time what they were truly capable of. The uniform changes, the regulations update, the technology evolves, but excellence? Excellence never goes out of style, and neither does the willingness to pass it on. They walked on in comfortable silence, two old soldiers carrying the weight of decades and the satisfaction of a job well done. Behind them, the sound of marching feet echoed across the parade ground. Left, right, left, right, left, right, in unison. Finally,